The air in the dining room was thick with unspoken words, a familiar tension that clung to the heavy velvet curtains and the polished mahogany of the long table. It was my husband James's birthday, a fact that seemed to be the only reason for this gathering. On one side of the table, there was my family, me, Eleanor, James, and our bright, beautiful daughter, Amelia. On the other side sat Beatrice, James's mother, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, especially when she looked at me or more pointedly, at Amelia. For 10 years, I had tried to build a bridge to Beatrice. I had hosted holidays, remembered her favorite flowers, and encouraged James to call her weekly. But the chasm between us remained, deep and unbreachable. The reason was simple, though she never dared say it aloud. Amelia was not born of my blood, or James's. We had adopted her when she was just a baby, a tiny, perfect soul who had filled a space in our hearts we hadn't known was empty. To me, she was the very definition of a miracle. To Beatrice, she was a constant reminder that I was not the daughter-in-law she had envisioned, the one who would have given her a real grandchild. Dinner proceeded with excruciating slowness. Beatrice offered clipped, single-word answers to my attempts at conversation while doting on James, recounting stories from his childhood as if no other time in his life mattered. James, ever the peacemaker, tried his best to steer the conversation into neutral territory, but it was like navigating a minefield. Amelia, now a perceptive 12-year-old, was mostly quiet. She sat straight and poised, her dark curls framing a face that was a mix of concentration and youthful innocence. She was used to her grandmother's coldness, though it pained me to my core that she had to be. She would often retreat into herself during these dinners, a defense mechanism she had developed far too young. The main course was cleared, and I brought out the cake, its candles flickering like tiny stars. We sang "Happy Birthday," our voices mingling in the tense air. James blew out the candles, making a show of it for Amelia, who rewarded him with a genuine, brilliant smile. For a moment, just a moment, it felt like a normal family celebration. But then, as I began to slice the cake, Beatrice leaned toward her son. She must have thought she was being discreet, but her voice, a low, venomous whisper, carried across the table with chilling clarity. "It's a shame Eleanor couldn't give you children of your own," she hissed, her eyes flicking toward Amelia with disdain. "She's a lovely girl, I suppose, but she's not family." Not really. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. My hand froze, the knife hovering over the cake. I looked at James, whose face had paled, his jaw tight with a mixture of shock and anger. He opened his mouth to speak, but before a single word could escape, a small, clear voice cut through the silence. "Yes, I am." We all turned to look at Amelia. She had pushed her chair back slightly and was now standing, her small frame radiating a strength that seemed impossible. Her eyes, usually so soft, were now fixed on her grandmother, unwavering and clear. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Beatrice's face, a mask of aristocratic disdain, faltered. Shock registered in her wide eyes, followed by a flicker of something darker, outrage. She looked from Amelia to me, then to James, as if expecting one of us to reprimand the child, to put her back in her place. But James and I were frozen, not by indecision, but by a profound, swelling sense of awe. My daughter, who I had so often tried to shield, was now shielding us. Amelia's gaze never left her grandmother's face. "You think family is just about blood," she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying none of the tremor of a child on the verge of tears, but all of the weight of a truth deeply felt. "But you're wrong. My friend Sarah has a brother who looks just like her, and they fight all the time. My mom and dad don't look like me, but they read to me every night. My dad taught me how to ride a bike and stayed with me every single time I fell. My mom holds me when I have a bad dream. She chose me. They both chose me." She took a small breath, her shoulders squared. "They wanted me. That's what family is. It's about who loves you, who shows up for you. I am my father's daughter, and I am my mother's daughter. We are a family. I'm sorry if you can't see that, but it doesn't make it any less true." The silence that followed was absolute. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. Beatrice's shock had now hardened into a cold fury. She finally found her voice, turning to James with a look of pure venom. "James, are you going to allow this child to speak to me that way?" Before James could even draw breath, I saw the shift in him. The years of placating, of trying to smooth over his mother's sharp edges, fell away. He pushed his chair back and stood, placing a protective hand on Amelia's shoulder. He was no longer the son trying to keep the peace. He was the father defending his child. "Her name is Amelia, mother. he said, his voice low and dangerous, a tone I had never heard him use with her before. And she is not this child. She is my daughter, and she has just explained something to you more clearly than I ever have, and for that, I am ashamed. He looked at Beatrice, and for the first time, I saw no pleading in his eyes, only a final, steely resolution. For 10 years, Eleanor and I have endured your sly remarks, your cold shoulders, your barely veiled insults. We did it because you are my mother. But this stops tonight. You will not disrespect my wife, and you will never ever disrespect my daughter again. She is more family to me than anyone who could hold such cruelty in their heart. We are a family. If you cannot accept that, if you cannot love Amelia as your granddaughter, then you are no longer welcome in our home, and we will no longer be in yours. Without another word, James looked at me, his eyes conveying a clear message. We're leaving. I nodded, my heart so full of love and pride for both my husband and my daughter that I felt it might burst. I stood up, took Amelia's other hand, and squeezed it. She looked up at me, a flicker of uncertainty finally appearing in her eyes, as if the adrenaline was wearing off and she was only now realizing the magnitude of what she had done. I gave her a smile that I hoped conveyed everything I was feeling. I'm so proud of you, I mouthed. We left the cake untouched on the table. We didn't bother with our coats, just walked straight out of the dining room, past the grandfather clock, and out the front door into the cool night air. As the door clicked shut behind us, it felt like the closing of a chapter, a long, painful chapter that we were finally leaving behind. The silence in the car was the complete opposite of the one we had left behind in the dining room. It wasn't heavy with resentment, but full of a quiet, humming energy. It was the calm after a storm, the feeling of air cleared after a lightning strike. James drove, his hands steady on the wheel, his profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. I sat beside him, and in the rearview mirror, I could see Amelia, a small silhouette in the back seat. For a few minutes, we were all lost in our own thoughts. I replayed the scene over and over in my mind, each time feeling a fresh wave of astonishment and pride. Finally, a small, hesitant voice broke the silence from the back. Am I in trouble? I turned in my seat so fast I almost pulled a muscle. I looked back at my daughter, her face awash with uncertainty. Oh, Amelia, honey, no. Absolutely not. James reached over and turned down the radio, which had been playing softly. Amelia, he said, his voice thick with emotion. What you did back there, that was the bravest thing I have ever seen. But Grandma was so angry, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. That is not your fault, I said firmly, reaching back to take her hand. Her fingers were cold, and I wrapped them in mine. Your grandmother was wrong. She has been wrong for a very, very long time. You spoke the truth, and you did it with more grace and strength than any adult I know. James nodded, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. A whole conversation passed between us in that single glance. A decade of frustration, of shared pain, and now, of united resolve. Your mom is right, he said, his voice clearer now. For years, I've tried to manage my mother. I asked you both to be patient, to put up with her ways. I thought I was keeping the peace, but I wasn't. I was just letting her hurt the people I love most. What you said tonight, Amelia. You said, family is about who loves you, who shows up for you. You were right. And tonight, I'm sorry that it took me so long to show up for you and your mom in the way I should have. Tears welled in my eyes. It was an apology I never knew I needed, a validation of all the years I had bitten my tongue and forced a smile for the sake of his family. When we got home, the house felt like a sanctuary. The air was warm and filled with the familiar sense of our life, not the sterile polish of Beatrice's home. Amelia was still quiet, the weight of the evening clearly settling on her young shoulders. I sent her upstairs to change into her pajamas while I put the kettle on. James stood in the middle of the living room, looking a little lost. I should have done that years ago, Eleanor, he said quietly, his back to me. I walked over to him and wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my head against his back. You did it tonight, I said. That's what matters. He turned in my arms and held me close. She'll never forgive me. Maybe, I conceded. But James, look at what we have. Look at that amazing daughter of ours. That is our family. That is what we protect. Just then, his phone, which he had left on the counter, began to buzz. The screen lit up with a single word. Mother. We both looked at it. The buzzing seemed to fill the room. A desperate, angry sound. James watched it for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then, with a decisive move, He picked up the phone, silenced the call, and set it face down on the counter. He turned back to me. "Let's have some cake." A slow smile spread across my face. We left the cake. "So we did," he said, a matching grin on his face. "Ice cream, then? I think a certain 12-year-old girl deserves a real birthday celebration." Amelia came down the stairs in her favorite fluffy pajamas, her hair a cascade of curls around her shoulders. She looked at us, standing in the kitchen, and a small, tentative smile touched her lips. At that moment, our home was not just a house. It was a fortress of love, built brick by brick, choice by choice, and we had never been stronger. The three of us sat on the living room floor, surrounded by cushions from the sofa, with bowls of ice cream in our laps. It was a spontaneous, imperfect celebration, and it was 1,000 times more joyful than the stiff formality of the dinner we had just fled. We put on a comedy Amelia loved, and the sound of her laughter, genuine and unrestrained, was the sweetest music I had ever heard. As the movie played, I watched her. She was nestled between James and me, occasionally leaning her head on her father's shoulder or reaching out to steal a sprinkle from my bowl. The tension that had held her so rigidly at the dinner table was gone, replaced by the soft, easy comfort of a child who feels safe. It struck me then that this was the first time in years she'd been completely relaxed after a family gathering involving Beatrice. A part of me grieved for all the times she hadn't been, for the subtle ways she had learned to shrink herself in her grandmother's presence. When the movie ended and the ice cream bowls were empty, Amelia's eyes were drooping. James scooped her up into his arms, just as he had when she was a toddler, and carried her upstairs. I followed, leaning against the doorframe of her bedroom as he tucked her into bed. "I love you, Daddy," she murmured, already half asleep. "I love you more, my brave girl," he whispered, kissing her forehead. He lingered for a moment, just watching her, and I could see the profound love etched on his face, raw and overwhelming. Downstairs, after the quiet of the house had settled around us, James finally picked up his phone again. The screen showed 3 missed calls and a string of text messages from his mother. I watched his face as he read them, seeing the familiar tightening of his jaw, the flicker of old guilt and new resolve. "She's not happy," he said, an understatement of epic proportions. "She's demanding an apology from Amelia." I felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce. "Absolutely not." "I know," he said quickly, holding up a hand. "I know. Don't worry." He began to type a reply. I walked over and read it over his shoulder. "Mother, Amelia has nothing to apologize for. She spoke the truth. We will not be discussing this further tonight. You owe both her and Eleanor an apology. Until you are ready to give one, there is nothing more to say." His thumb hovered over the send button for a fraction of a second before he pressed it firmly. He took a deep breath, like a man who had just set down a heavy burden he had been carrying for miles. "And now?" I asked softly. "And now we live our lives," he said, wrapping an arm around me. "Our life, the one we built here, in this house. She can choose to be a part of it, or she can choose not to. But the price of admission is respect. It's love. I won't force my wife and daughter to pay for her bitterness anymore." The days that followed were strangely peaceful. The phone didn't ring. No angry messages appeared. It was a vacuum, a silent space where Beatrice's oppressive presence used to be. James's birthday came and went, marked by our own quiet celebration. We bought him a new watch, and Amelia made him a card decorated with a drawing of the 3 of us holding hands. He said it was the best birthday he'd ever had. I noticed a change in Amelia, too. It was subtle, but it was there. A little more confidence in her voice, a little more spring in her step. She talked more about her friends, her school projects, the funny things that happened during her day. It was as if a small, dark cloud that had been hovering over her had finally dissipated, allowing her true, bright personality to shine through completely. She was no longer bracing for the next cutting remark, the next cold glance. She was simply free to be herself. About a week after the disastrous dinner, I was helping Amelia with her history homework when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered. "Hello? Eleanor? It's Thomas." It took me a second to place the name. Thomas was James's older brother, a man we saw even less than Beatrice. He lived several states away and was a quiet, reserved person who had always stayed out of the family drama. "Tom, hello. Is everything all right?" I asked, a knot of apprehension forming in my stomach. I suppose that depends on how you look at it," he said, his voice strained. "I just got off the phone with Mother. She told me what happened." I braced myself for a lecture. for a defense of his mother. I see, I said neutrally. No, he said. And then he sighed, a heavy, weary sound. No, you don't. Eleanor, I'm calling to tell you that you did the right thing. James did the right thing. What Amelia did. It was long overdue. I was so taken aback by Thomas's words that for a moment I couldn't find a reply. I had always assumed he shared his mother's views, or at the very least, was indifferent. We had exchanged polite Christmas cards, and he had always been pleasant enough during the rare family gatherings, but he was an enigma, a quiet observer on the sidelines. Tom, I don't know what to say, I stammered. You don't have to say anything, he replied, his voice still heavy. I heard the whole story from her. Of course, her version was all about the disrespect, the audacity. But I've known my mother for 45 years. I can read between the lines. She finally said the quiet part out loud, didn't she? She did, I confirmed softly. He sighed again. She's a difficult woman, Eleanor. She's been hardened by life, by her own choices. My father wasn't an easy man. She wanted a certain kind of life, a certain kind of family. And when things didn't turn out exactly as she pictured, she became bitter. She sees slights where there are none and holds on to grudges like they're precious heirlooms. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was filled with a regret that seemed to stretch back decades. I spent my whole life just trying to stay out of her way. It was easier. James always tried to please her, to fix things. I just left. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry that I wasn't a better brother to James. And I'm sorry I left you and Amelia to bear the brunt of her unhappiness. Thank you, Tom, I said, my voice thick with emotion. That means more than you know. For what it's worth, he continued, I told her she was in the wrong. I told her that she was going to lose her son and her granddaughter for good if she didn't open her eyes. She hung up on me. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Some things never change. But I wanted you to know that you're not alone in this. You have an ally, even if he's a quiet one, hundreds of miles away. When I told James about the call later that evening, he was visibly moved. It was a crack of light in the monolithic wall of his family's disapproval. It didn't fix what Beatrice had done, but it was a reminder that her worldview was not the only one. The call from Thomas seemed to cement James's resolve, freeing him from the last vestiges of guilt he may have felt. The weeks turned into a month, then 2. The silence from Beatrice was absolute. It was like a stone dropped into a deep well, and we never heard the splash. For the first time in our marriage, there was no upcoming holiday to dread, no obligatory Sunday dinner looming on the calendar. The peace was palpable. We took Amelia on a weekend trip to the coast, just the 3 of us. We built sand castles, flew a kite, and ate fish and chips on the pier as the sun went down. It was simple and utterly perfect. One crisp autumn afternoon, Amelia came home from school with a small, cream-colored envelope in her hand. This was in the mailbox, she said, her expression unreadable. It's for me. I looked at the handwriting. It was the elegant, spiky script I knew instantly belonged to Beatrice. My heart did a slow, nervous flip. James, who was in the kitchen, came over, and we both looked at our daughter. What do you want to do? I asked gently. Amelia looked at the envelope for a long moment, turning it over in her hands. It was the first contact, the first sign of life from the other side of the chasm. She could have thrown it away, and I would have supported her. She could have given it to us to open, and I would have understood. Instead, she took a deep breath. I'm going to open it, she said, her voice firm. She sat at the kitchen table, and with a steadiness that continued to amaze me, she slid her finger under the seal and pulled out a single sheet of matching cream-colored paper. James and I stood back, giving her space, but our eyes were fixed on her face. Her eyes scanned the page. It wasn't a long letter. After a minute, she looked up, her expression one of quiet confusion. What does it say, honey? James asked, his voice gentle. Amelia looked back down at the letter. She says she's sorry, she said so softly we almost didn't hear it. She says she has been thinking about what I said. She said she was wrong. And she asked if I would be willing to have tea with her. Just her and me. James and I exchanged a look of pure astonishment over Amelia's head. An apology. It was the last thing either of us had expected. My first instinct was suspicion, a deeply ingrained defense mechanism built from years of Beatrice's behavior. Was this a trick? A way to get Amelia alone to manipulate her? But James, seeing my expression, put a calming hand on my arm. He knelt beside Amelia's chair. How do you feel about that, sweetie? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Amelia looked from the letter to her father's face, then to mine. I don't know. she said honestly. I'm surprised. She traced the elegant script with her finger. It sounds sad. What do you mean? I asked, pulling up a chair to sit with her. The way she writes, Amelia explained, her perception once again cutting to the heart of the matter. It sounds like she's lonely. And in that moment, all my anger, all my resentment toward Beatrice seemed to recede, replaced by a wave of pity for a woman so trapped in her own bitterness that her 12-year-old granddaughter could sense her loneliness through a few lines of text. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, I said, making my voice as gentle as possible. No matter what the letter says. If you want to throw it away, we will. If you want to say no, we will support you 100%. This is your choice. Your mom is right, James added, his hand resting on her shoulder. We are proud of you no matter what. Amelia was quiet for a long time, her gaze distant. We gave her the space to think, the silence in the kitchen holding a fragile, hopeful quality. Finally, she looked up at us, her decision made. I think I want to meet her, she said, but not at her house. And I want you both to be there. Not in the room, but close by, just in case. It was a compromise so wise, so perfectly balanced, that it brought tears to my eyes. She was willing to extend an olive branch, but she was not willing to put herself in a vulnerable position. She was setting her own terms. And so the following Saturday, we found ourselves at a small, cheerful cafe in the center of town. James and I took a table in a corner, partially hidden by a large potted plant, where we could see the entrance. Amelia chose a small table for two right by the window. She sat with her back straight, a glass of water in front of her, looking like a poised and serious diplomat awaiting a foreign dignitary. When Beatrice walked in, she looked older and more fragile than I had ever seen her. Her usual severe posture was slightly stooped, and she clutched her handbag as if it were a lifeline. She scanned the cafe, her eyes finally landing on her granddaughter. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she slowly made her way to the table. We couldn't hear their words, but we watched the scene unfold like a silent movie. We saw Beatrice talking, her hands gesturing awkwardly. We saw Amelia listening, her head tilted, her expression patient. There were long pauses. At one point, Beatrice reached a hand across the table, and after a moment's hesitation, Amelia placed her own small hand on top of it. They sat like that for a long time. After nearly an hour, they stood up. Beatrice said something that made Amelia give a small, tentative smile. Then, they walked out of the cafe together. We stayed put, giving them their moment. Later, in the car on the way home, Amelia told us what was said. Beatrice had apologized again, face to face. She hadn't made excuses, but she had for the first time spoken of her own disappointments, of a life that hadn't gone as planned. She had spoken of her own loneliness. She admitted that in her pain she had wanted to inflict it on others, and that she was deeply ashamed. She asked me about my friends, Amelia said, a note of wonder in her voice. She asked me what books I like to read. She never asked me that before. Amelia paused, then added, I think she really wants to try. That tea was not a magical fix. It didn't instantly erase a decade of hurt, but it was a beginning. A slow, tentative, and achingly real beginning. Beatrice started to call, not to demand, but to ask. She'd call James and ask what project Amelia was working on in school. She sent a book in the mail that she thought Amelia might like. For Christmas that year, she didn't give Amelia a generic gift card. She gave her a beautiful set of paintbrushes and an easel, with a note that said, "For the artist." Our family dinners were different now. They were smaller, quieter, and held in the warmth of our own home. Beatrice would come, and she would listen. She would watch Amelia with a new light in her eyes, not the cold glint of judgment, but the soft glow of someone who was trying, finally, to see the person who was actually there. She was learning to love the granddaughter she had, not the one she had once imagined. Our family was not defined by blood, but by choice. It was forged in the fire of a painful confrontation and rebuilt on the foundation of a brave girl's truth. It was a testament to the fact that family isn't about where you come from. It's about the people who show up, who choose to love you, and who are brave enough to say, "I'm sorry." If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a message of hope. The most beautiful families are often the ones we build ourselves, with courage, forgiveness, and an abundance of love.